Hello and welcome to the TELUS original Filmmakers Talk, Reshaping Representations of Indigenous Peoples in the Media. I will be your host for today. My name is Jade Tootoosis. I am from the Red Pheasant Cree Nation in Treaty 6 territory. I'm also a member of the Rocky Boy Chippewa Cree Nation in Montana. I am a granddaughter, I am a daughter, I am a niece, and I'm also an auntie. I'm an educator, a justice advocate, and a fancy shawl dancer. And I'm so excited to be a part of today's event. I think it's important that we acknowledge the lands and territories to which we are living and situated. Tasha and I are from the Treaty 6 territory, currently living in Amiskwachiwa Skygun, Beaver Hills Lodge, also known as Edmonton, Alberta. Jules is from Treaty 9 territory and is currently living in Vancouver, British Columbia. And we have Dan joining us from all the way from London, England. So welcome, everyone. Hi. It's good to mention that this event is being recorded, and you will be able to view it on telus.originals.com and the TELUS Optic TV at a later date. So introducing our amazing, talented storytellers today, starting off with Dr. Tasha Hubbard. Dr. Tasha Hubbard is a filmmaker and associate professor in the Faculty of Native Studies at the University of Alberta. She is from the Papikasis First Nation and is the mother of a 16-year-old son. Her last film, Nipo Misawasawin, We Will Stand Up, opened Hot Docs Canadian International Film Festival and won the top Canadian Film Prize in the Canadian Screen Award for the Best Feature Documentary. She was also awarded the Discovery Award for the Directors Guild of Canada. She researches Indigenous efforts to return buffalo to the land and Indigenous films in North America. Her newest film, Singing Back the Buffalo, is coming out in 2024. Our next guest is Dr. Jules Arita Koostachin. Jules is an award-winning Cree filmmaker, mother, writer, performance artist, and academic. With her background in community work, social justice themes emerge in her films, alongside bravery, healing, connection, and humor. Jules honors her Cree-speaking grandparents who raised her and her mother, a residential school survivor and warrior. Relying on a creative eye, keen mind, and strong heart, Jules' accomplishments include raising her 4 sons, while pursuing her academic and artistry. Graduating from Concordia University's theater program, Jules went on to Ryerson University, receiving early recognition with an award of distinction and an academic gold medal for her thesis documentary film. Jules went on to do her PhD in Indigenous documentary and protocols and processes at UBC. And our third guest today is Mr. Daniel Levy. Daniel is a multi-hyphenate, Emmy Award-winning creator, best known for his work on the hit television show Schitt's Creek, which he co-created with his father. More recently, he wrote, produced, directed, and starred in Good Grief, an upcoming Netflix original film. In 2020, Dan joined the University of Alberta's MOOC, Indigenous Canada, participating in weekly discussions and helping skyrocket the course's popularity. He continues to support and raise funds for the Faculty of Native Studies. Awesome, thank you, Dan. Thank you. It's good to mention that this conversation is made possible by TELUS Originals and the Faculty of Native Studies. TELUS Originals funds the production of compelling, locally reflective, social purpose documentaries and documentary series that connect established independent filmmakers in BC and Alberta from diverse identities and communities. And I'd also like to thank Loose Lips Media for their excellent work in producing this event for us. Today, we also have Larissa and Carmen doing ASL interpretations. Thank you both. Woo, we got through the intro. Welcome, everyone.
Hardest part.
You did great.
Yeah. Well, it is an honor to share space with all of you and to have this conversation today, reshaping representation. I love that. Comes from like the strength-based approach, and I love the topic. So to begin things, I'd like to turn the conversation over to Dr. Tasha Hubbard to share a little bit more about what we'll be diving into. So thank you, Tasha.
Great. Thanks, Jade. Well, yeah, so this began as a conversation, and an invitation from TELUS Originals to do a filmmaker talk, and it came out of discussions around an online class that I had developed when I was wearing my academic hat for the faculty, and had been asked to create an online course that unpacks and dismantles colonial stereotypes of Indigenous people. And so we came up with essentially 10 different stereotype groupings that we then found what the origin was, why there's continued investment in having these stereotypes continue. And one of the courses, of course, was stereotypes that exist in film and media and other representations of Indigenous people. And so, could you do this talk on that? And I'm like, I could, but it would be way more fun if I had people to talk to about it. So I'm just going to give a little bit of background on sort of what we did in the class. And it was a co-created course. So just give me a second to share my screen. So this is the course that we co-created, myself, Dr. Savage Bear, Sarah Howdle, and Molly Swain. And so we did this very collaborative approach to creating the course, and thinking about how we would, essentially get into that history and really see why these stereotypes are so stubborn. And why they originate often in, contact times, 17th, 18th, 19th century, but we still see them being replicated into today, and specifically within film. So, I just want to thank them so much for their brilliant work, and it was a really great team. So this course now lives online, and you can take it for credit, and we'll also chat later about how it can be done as lifelong learners. So let's get through the ugly stuff first. So this is like, films, even though Indigenous people were some of the first filmmakers, that quickly shifted, and we start to get into more racist depictions of Indigenous people, really based on the stereotypes. So we get that sort of the violent elements. We also get the subservient stereotype, the helper Indigenous person who essentially helps colonial expansion. So, Indigenous people are either seen as obstacles to colonial expansion or helpers. But often, because, underpinning that is their, being primitive and therefore in need of help. And we we see stereotypes come out of that with, Indigenous people as dysfunctional, deficient, undeserving, all of that stuff that comes in different ways. So this is, early film, and often Indigenous women are only seen as helpmates or as access to the land. And then we start to see it, continue through in different ways, in different science fiction depictions. I'll even say my son and I go to a movie and we hear that terrible phrase, "They've gone off the reservation," which again plays into that violence. And every time we just look at each other like, oh my God, they're so stubborn, right? These stereotypes. But, especially in, I want to take a moment to acknowledge, the basically our film grandmothers, aunties, uncles, those generations of filmmakers that came before mine and Jules' time, who really, pushed to take that space back within the film industry that, had been there in the early days, and then had, when we did get pushed out, sort of, having those lovely sharp elbows to push our way back in, and to start to shift the narrative about, the need for us to be the creative force behind representations of us and our communities and our families and our homes and our territories. And so, really in this act of claiming sovereignty and narrative sovereignty and visual sovereignty as a result. And, it's those grandparents and aunts and uncles that came before that really made that space for us to do the work that we do. And I'll just make a note, part of the place where, we grow as filmmakers and have community is at the Imaginative Film Festival and other Indigenous film festivals around not just North America, but the world. And there was a time where it always seemed like we basically knew each other or knew each other's work. And, in the last 5 years, that's changed so much. There are just many new Indigenous creatives coming through that we don't know everyone. And I love it. It's like, who's that? And that's great work. So that's been really, really exciting. We still have some challenges, within those goals of narrative sovereignty. We're seeing cultural appropriation and complicated identity issues. And then as, the topic, some of the continuation of some of those stubborn stereotypes. So, we also have our support system. We in Canada here saw the creation of the Indigenous Screen Office. We're seeing shifts happen within industry. We have allies within and our own relational networks, to support each other, to support each other's work. And so, we're at a time where, we're really able to take up space and, have our stories come forward. And just have a really strong and amazing work out there that tell our true stories. And I'm just so pleased to be here and to have this opportunity to have a conversation with Jules and Dan. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Tasha. It's important. Representation matters. Representation matters, and that's why I think it's great that you guys are all together and able to share that insight and that knowledge and to have this discussion. I'd like to open the floor to some opening thoughts for Jules and Dan to also share a bit there.
I'll hand it over to Dan first.
Oh, goodness. I think I couldn't agree more in terms of representation and being so important in this conversation. And I think, I am here as someone who is going to be learning from these conversations. I'm someone here who has access to hopefully take what we've discussed here and do what I can to implement it in a very real way, in whatever way I can. And I'm also someone, and this is by no means a comparison, but I think as a gay person in media, there are similar challenges in terms of how do you find yourself accurately represented on screen in a way that isn't reduced, in a way that isn't caricatured, in a way that feels reflective of your experience and the nuances of your experience and the diversity of the experiences within that sort of conversation. And it's a complicated conversation, one that I'm very much looking forward to having with everyone, but I think it really starts with making sure that people whose experience, that people in high positions of power reflect the storytelling that is wanting to be made. If you don't have someone at the top who's able to kind of look at a script and say, this doesn't feel totally right, we should bring someone in to kind of look at this, or we should have a deeper conversation with the writer to make sure that it's been properly researched, or better yet, it has been collaborated, or, been in conversation with someone who's experienced, if the writer is not of the conversation that's being had. But you can't stop that from being made if you don't have someone along the way to say, no, this isn't going to be doing anyone any favors. So I'm very much grateful to be a part of this conversation and to really spend a lot of this time listening, to be honest.
So Wache, I'm coming in from the unceded ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples. So happy to be here. For For me, I grew up in my community. I grew up with my aunties and my uncles, and my grandparents didn't speak English. They were hunter-trappers. We didn't have water, electricity. Sometimes we had electricity, but we had to go fetch our water and stuff. But I grew up listening to their stories. And I think protocol is a huge part of my upbringing in terms of how we share our collective stories. And, you know, I also believe we have sacred stories too that are not meant to be shared. I don't know, for me, I think positionality also matters. And what I mean by that is that, you know, you need to state your relationship to the story that you're telling. And I think as Indigenous folks, the stakes are high for us. Like, we have to be responsible to our community and to our community members and to our family as well. So there's definitely lots at stake. You know, when I went off to university, like, I didn't have a really good experience navigating the educational system. And when I went off to university, I went to Concordia University, and I struggled. But I remember being introduced to Alanis Obamsawin, and it just blew my mind because I'm a 70s kid. So I grew up with a lot of documentary in the classroom. So anyway, I don't want to say how old I am, but yeah, we just like grew up watching docs. And then, you know, you have that didactic voice, the white man telling you what's happening on the screen with these Indigenous folks. And then when I saw 270 Years of Resistance, Alanis's voice replaced that didactic voice of God kind of thing, and was replaced by this Indigenous woman. So for me, you know, I just think, yes, representation does matter. It is so important to see ourselves reflected on the screen. And I also agree with Tasha and Dan, like, we need to be in those key creative roles. I'm so happy to see that there's more and more Indigenous-led production companies, which means that we are making decisions. We are not relying on others to make decisions for us, because we are the authority in our lives. We are the experts in our lives and our lived experience. So who else better to tell our stories than us, right? So yeah, I just feel like positionality for me is key.
Absolutely. Thank you both for those opening remarks. And allyship is important. We need allies to help us make that space, and, you know, to acknowledge and respect the voices and the stories to which we have. So before we get into the question portion, I just want to let our audience know that you can also pose some questions for our panelists today. There is a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. You can submit them there, and hopefully at the end of the conversation, we'll be able to get to a few of your questions for our panelists. All right, I think everybody sort of touched on this topic a little bit already, but if you want to expand, I'm still gonna ask the question: what was the motivation for all of you to become filmmakers and creatives? And how did stereotypes in general impact you? Is there anybody that would like to begin?
Yeah, I didn't see film as a possibility. I have really talented aunties and uncles. I have artists and musicians in my family, and I can't draw and I can't sing. And I'm like, okay, it skipped me, right? It skipped my generation, but I love the arts, and I'm just going to be in a support position. And I was lucky to meet Gil Cardinal, the late Gil Cardinal, documentary filmmaker, Cree Métis. And, he sat me down and was like, this is what's possible. And, I had grown up in a non-Indigenous environment, and so was surrounded by stereotypes, was impacted by them, and how I viewed myself. And I think all of Indigenous people, we live with that, whether it's micro aggressions or more overt. A lot of times what's behind that is these stereotypes. So, for Gil, what he presented to me was the possibility of like reclaiming, who I am as an Indigenous person, as a Cree person, that I can do the kinds of projects that I want that, help me in that, in that journey. And, I was lucky in that I found my family when I was 16 and, had their support in that pursuit. And, that's really what sparked it was, why didn't I know these stories? And it's like, because they've been kept from, you know, our educational spaces, our media landscapes, and, you know, so that it just was really an inspiring moment to go, like, I can have a role in bringing these stories forward. And again, sort of saw myself in a support capacity, and then was lucky that, I had a producer director sort of say, you know, I think you could learn how to do this. You should do this. I'm like, okay, I'll learn how, you know, and followed the path to do that. You know, and I think what's amazing is because the possibilities are clear now. And I think that's why we're seeing so many more Indigenous creatives coming, is that's no longer the case where this isn't even an option. It's absolutely an option. And, you know, again, you know, there's been a lot of work to get us to this point, and there's still more to do, but, you know, the possibilities are super exciting.
So I'll just jump in. I think for me, when I was a kid, I grew up in the projects, but I also grew up in my community, and I always like was pretending that there was a camera crew following me around. Like I always like, I just loved acting, and I never had that opportunity when I was young. And I don't know, I had in grade 4, I produced this play called The Play. And I was the big director, and it got all out of hand and out of control. And I was like, all right, well, maybe I'll put that aside for now. But anyway, then I was this young actor. And I remember the roles I was auditioning for, like this is back, I don't even want to tell you, a long, long time ago. And I just remember like just being so appalled, going, oh my God, I can't even like do this audition. And sometimes I audition today, and some of the stuff I read is like, who wrote this? Like, wow, like get with the program. Anyway, but yeah, so I think for me, I've just like always loved, you know, in theater and acting and movies. And yeah, and again, like I said, I'm a 70s child, so we watched a lot of really long, super boring documentaries. Like even my kids now, like they go, what are you watching, Mom? Oh my God, that is the most boring thing, because they're listening outside. But I think my attention span is better than theirs. But anyway, I don't know, I feel like for me, I just grew up with storytellers, and I don't know, I loved hanging out with family and listening to them tell stories. And Cree people where I'm from are like super animated, and we're a little bit crazy and funny, and we just like to stand up and start acting things out. I don't know, it's just like how I was raised. And I just love film too. Like I think for me, being in the director's role is really important. Sometimes I'll put myself in front of camera, but then I get so distracted because I'm watching everything fall apart behind the scenes sometimes. But I don't know, I just feel like we're in a place now. And I remember when meeting Tasha, and I'm just a shout out for Tasha, she's so kind and beautiful. And I remember going to this film summit, and then you just took me under your wing, and you were just so sweet. So shout you out. And I think that's really important when we talk about supporting each other within the, you know, community, is that sometimes it's, you know, the industry is tough, you know, and it's hard on your ego. So it's really nice when you have support and friends and people holding you up.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think there's so many commonalities to the conversation here. And I think starting with support, I think about the moment that I felt empowered to write, and it was a teacher who I had an essay to write in high school, and I did not read the book. But the point was, the book was written in a certain style, and I chose to write an essay about my not having read the book in the style of the book. And it was a real big swing, and I knew that I kind of had to do something other than, you know, just not handing in the paper. And my teacher pulled me aside after having read it and basically said, you know, this is very good. And I'm overlooking the fact that you didn't read the book, because what you've shown me is a skill that I could make the decision to kind of hold this against you, or I can tell you right now in this moment that I think you should start pursuing writing. And up until that point, I didn't know what I wanted for myself. And I certainly didn't have anyone, I had my parents who had always kind of supported me, but nobody really being a vocal advocate for a skill set that they recognized in me. And I found that so important. And I always look back to that moment as one of the defining moments of my life. And I've always wanted to express myself. I think when you spend a lot of the time as a gay person, when you spend a lot of the time in the closet, you spend time kind of hiding yourself, and you don't really get to express. And I think when I came out, that's when I felt really emboldened to kind of hold on to creativity and use that as a way of expressing myself and hoping to make up for all the years that I wasn't able to do that. And so that sort of theme of the want combined with the support is so valuable, and we all should be kind of as supportive as we possibly can of each other, because I think it's one of those things that you don't even know in the time that it might have the ripple effect that it has, but it's so significant. And I don't know where I'd be without it.
It's so great to hear that each and every one of you shared something, took a risk and resisted and pushed back on something. And you came upon teachers or leaders or just someone who believed in you or were able to be like, you should do this, gave you that little bit of nudge. And that's what especially our young people, that's what they need, because at times they don't see that within themselves, And so I just thank you all for sharing a little bit about yourself. Jules and Tasha, I know you spoke up again a bit. Stereotypes is the theme of this conversation, but how have you seen colonial stereotypes impact you as an Indigenous filmmaker, historically or recently?
Yeah. There's something that's just burning on my brain, so I want to get it out. So, and this again comes back to representation and who is the writer, who is the director, who the producer who makes, making decisions. All of that really matters. And, I came up at a time where, my earlier career success put me in line in an awareness where I started to have non-Indigenous director producers approach me because they had a project that had Indigenous themes and Indigenous characters, or just flat out told an Indigenous story, and then wanted to hire me as a consultant and to really sort of help their work look better and have a better chance of success. And it was a really frustrating time, and I did 2 or 3, and eventually I'm like, okay, so I'm not sure I'm going to get listened to, but it's going to be my name on the credits. And that's really frustrating when I don't actually have agency, right? To actually change and make changes that were needed. And, the worst was a European filmmaker who, it was just so full of stereotypes. It was based on a book in Europe. It had the violent Indigenous man. It had it just had everything. It was just like, what's the top 10 Indigenous stereotypes? And we're going to hit every one of them. And it was like, it was so bad. And, I had a meeting with them, and I'm like, this actually does damage. Like, your project is doing damage to our communities, to who we are as Indigenous people, and anyway, I didn't get the job. It was actually a job. It's actually a job talk. Did not get it. They didn't hire me. And that was sort of the final straw where I'm like, I am not going to do this anymore. I just want to work either supporting, my own projects or supporting other Indigenous creatives. And I think I've mostly stuck to that. I think there's just, that's overt, that's just total misunderstanding. But even projects that are well-intentioned and well-meaning, I think it's, the complexities and the nuances, those are the sorts of things that, that come that we know the realities in our communities. We know the brilliance. We know all of the elements of who we are as full Indigenous human beings, right? And, I think having ourselves in that place to tell those stories, that's what comes forward. And we transcend those stereotypes. Even if we're playfully pushing at them, and I think that there's lots of great comedy that comes out that we know these stereotypes, and we're going to we're going to play against them in a really self-aware and funny way. But yeah, ultimately I think that's where we're at, is wanting to transcend that in our work.
It speaks a lot to just settler entitlement too, I think. When you have been a dominant force for so long, it almost is ingrained this level of just like, well, I can do that. And, I put in a couple lines that are sort of empathetic, and that should be enough. And it's not. And I think from my experience, especially with the MOOC, education, educating yourself, continuing to educate yourself as much as you possibly can on the experiences of other people is the key to changing, I think, that whole concept of someone feeling entitled to tell a story that they're not entitled to tell, or not having the wherewithal or the understanding to know, in this particular case, I'm not just going to bring you on as a consultant, I'm going to bring you on as a producer, and I'm going to bring you on in a meaningful way where your voice is heard. And it's not just going to be a situation where, a person's in the room that knows that at the end of the day, someone else is going to be in that edit room, and what comes out might not be a reflection of anything that they had said along the way. So it really comes down to making sure that there is more education, that the people who are choosing to produce or make certain projects make those choices, and make the choices of who they're hiring, even about themselves, whether it's the right project for that person to even produce. Oftentimes it's not. Maybe this is a situation where you really love the project, you take a back seat as a producer, and you let someone else come in and make it that should be making it. Those are the kinds of systemic shifts that need to be made in order to really make space, meaningful space, for stories that are outside of the settler experience, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think for me, I don't know, I struggled navigating through the educational system. And after I started my dissertation back a couple of years ago, I decided to focus just completely on film and television and stuff like that. It was a great decision. I did lease a car because I was offered a tenure track position at a university, and I turned it down, and I had this brand new lease car. Thank God I don't have to live in my car. I've kept my head above water. But the reality is that I think many of us are not there economically either. And we're always having to, struggle to kind of survive as an artist. But for me, I feel like when I do my work, being a producer, director, writer, I make those decisions on my set. So I don't have to ask anyone permission, which is great for me, because I feel like when things are not aligned, I'll just stop production, be like, all right, everybody circle, smudge, let's figure this out. And then everybody's grateful. And actually you're way more productive after, when everybody's aligned like that. So I don't know. And I get to make choices, because I think when I was younger, I also saw a lot of, I think maybe Tasha can relate to this too, and we saw a lot of urban Indigenous stories, I think back about 20 years ago. I mean, I'm only 25, so I was 5 years old back then. I'm just kidding. But yeah, I didn't necessarily see a lot of far northern, except for north of 60, but my community is a fly-in community. So our reality was a little bit different in terms of how we lived. So I didn't necessarily see that truth on the screen so much. So I don't know. I just feel like I'm incorporating all the things that I learned growing up in my community, growing up with my grandparents, growing up with my mom, things that are important to me. And I'm not always in this position of resistance either. I feel that gets that's emotional labor. when you're always in this position of having to educate people. I just want to work. I want to be able to pay my bills. I want to be an artist. I want to create without having all these barriers in place. Like, you know, I just feel like, I don't know, it's a lot. Like after I say that I survived the educational system, which I did, but I feel like, you know, I don't want to do that in my creative world. I feel I've worked really hard to be where I am. I've kind of sacrificed my career a few times, having 2 sets of kids. Now they're older. Now I can focus on myself, which is really great. And I get to do things that I want to do. And you know, my last production, Angela's Shadow, we had predominantly Indigenous crew. Like it was like so many Indigenous people on set, and they got it. It was so cool. And I want to do more of that. And I do a lot of mentoring as well. And I show up on their sets and support them. I know there's definitely a shift. I know there's a lot of stereotypes. I know we haven't really seen ourselves reflected on the screen, but that's changing. You know, we have the ISO, we have really amazing trailblazers. I just feel like there's a lot that's been happening over the last, I would say, century, because, you know, we have to acknowledge the ones way before us as well who have paved the way.
Absolutely. The structural changes that need to take place within the industry are still there, and there's still work that needs to be done. But as you each share, it's just, I don't know if you realize how much work you have each done within this area, and to be able to make way for so many others. What are some other Indigenous films that are examples or models in the field that people could look to?
Tasha's films.
Of course.
You know, I think, you know, there's this last few years, it's been really incredible. You know, so I'll just focus there, because I don't think we've seen that before, where there's just been so many come out. And this isn't the Canadian, I'll just speak specifically to the Canadian context. I mean, you know, we had Night Raiders come, we had Beans, we've had Run Woman Run, we've had, you know, Flood Quantum. It was just like 2 or 3 years where it was like, you know, Jules' work, my work, like there's been a lot that have come. And you know, I think in terms of, if people, you know, audience is always the challenge, and I think we're always trying to find ways to make sure that the work is connecting with audiences. And that's, you know, we need support, we need people to be, you know, watching our work, looking for our work, you know, putting our work out on the social media so others can discover it. You know, coming to, you know, we're getting more and more work that's being theatrically released. You know, we need people there. We need people, you know, the you know, the butt and seat kind of deal. You know, we need people to watch our work. You know, but I think, you know, the works that are coming out is, you know, there is that you know, a whole area around resistance. And I hear you, you know, Jules, around it is you know, we do have, you know, there is that pressure to do some of that heavy lifting around teaching. And I think you know, I think it's finding that we all find that balance between making our own work and then doing advocacy work within industry, doing mentoring work, you know, for other filmmakers, you know, whether that's formal or informal. So all of those things, you know, are part of that effort. But yeah, you know, go to you know, a lot of the streamers now curate Indigenous film lists. You can just go and, you know, do put Indigenous in the search line and watch the work. You know, it's there. And you know, local festivals, things like that, you know, with short films.
What would you say are some of the sort of reasons for this swell in recent work that you're talking about?
I think there's a few things at play. I think it is that internal advocacy that's been happening within sort of the Canadian cultural industry places. So Telefilm, CMF, National Film Board, Canada Council. I mean, there's been, I think, a complicated mix of advocacy coming from Indigenous filmmakers and having allies within those spaces who push boundaries. And, we're starting to see Indigenous people hired within those spaces as well. I think there's still a lot of work. There's still, I think, sometimes a resistance for those who do hold those positions of power to do some self-examination. Geez, do I have any latent, so is there any stereotypes hiding in my, it's work we all need to do, right? It's work people need to do. And I think, Dan, we acknowledge, the work you've done within the faculty and taking our classes and doing that. And I think that's a big thing. I also would say, as a result of that advocacy, the establishment of the Indigenous Screen Office has really been a game changer in the way that it's taken on the role of advocating that the rest, that filmmakers had to sort of take on at some point.
Right.
Not that stopped, but to have, something formalized and funded, and hopefully continually funded. And, if you have the chance to support and push for, continued financial support of the ISO, that would be great. It needs to happen. But what that has done is it supported mid-career filmmakers to really, get past the mindset of, oh, well, you're an Indigenous filmmaker with this, sometimes 2 decades of work. Let's put you in a micro budget program. It's like, I went to a thing 12 years ago, that had us come and present our stories, and several of us had residential school films, and an executive told us, oh, that's been done already, I'm not really interested. And we kind of had a little chat after, and we were like, what were they talking about? And it was a TV show that was done in the 80s, and we're like, oh, so we only get one, that's how this works. Okay. Okay, good to know, right? Like, it's like stuff.
It's really shocking how the industry works, and it still works. It's all, it's like one movie fails and it's suddenly no one wants to make, that type of movie, or we have Barbie sort of succeeding in a big scale, and the major conversation is, well, we need another Barbie movie. And it's like, no, it's about a female lead of a film. We need more of that.
More toy movies.
And you think, no, it's still something that needs to change, because there's so much fear, I think, associated around what happens if something fails. Yeah. That the idea of risk taking, I believe now more than ever, is at an all-time low. Yeah. And it's convincing people that just because you did one thing in 1980 doesn't mean that we can't continue the conversation or expand the conversation or reveal a different side to the conversation. But it's a very difficult, I've had conversations myself, just about my own stories. And it's like, well, one gay person over there doesn't mean that one gay, I mean, and in a way you almost hate that it's reduced to that. Because the story that you're telling is so much more than that, but that's what it's been made to feel like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They don't see the diversity within our communities, I think, and tokenism and everything else under the sun, It's challenging for sure.
Well, and I think that you've hit on that, exactly, is that idea of tokenism, and it's the one represents the all, right? And that doesn't, make space for the diversity of voices. And I think that's where we're starting to move into as well, that, Indigenous as a term, I mean, but there's so much diversity and difference, and we're all come with our unique cultural ways of telling story, and it isn't all the same, and we have different perspectives, and they're all needed, and we all have something to say with them. So I think it's, and it comes back to sort of attitudes within those who those who are in decision-making roles, right? And we're starting to see that change with people within what I always say is, great, you've hired one, now where's their team, right? Where are their colleagues? Because, that's something I learned in academia. It's like, oh, there's one person, and you have to represent everything. And it's like, puts that all on one person's shoulders. It's like, why? No, it's the first one of many, keep going, now you've shown you know how to do it, So I see that in the industry as well. That's what I hope for. And I think what I know a lot of people are pushing for, there's been many voices of advocacy over the decades, and it's starting to change, but always new challenges, right?
If I ever get invited to, a film lab or anything like that, I always look around and see if I'm the only one. If there's two, I'm like, yes, okay, there's two of us at least. Then you're not tokenized, right? And then everybody looks at you. If there's a question about indigeneity, you're just kind of like, oh, I don't know. I'm from the East Coast. I know that lived experience. And that's what I was talking about too, the urban and the rural. Like, there's so many different lived experiences. Like, I just feel like there's so much opportunity to kind of go there. That's why I think it's great to have, many Indigenous production companies across Turtle Island, so that we can be in those positions of power.
We do have a really good question from the audience with regards to this amazing conversation taking place right now. Our audience member would like to thank you for hosting this talk, or us for hosting this talk. And they wonder if you can talk more about what successful collaboration looks like to you, especially in terms of sharing our stories, Indigenous stories, with partners who are non-Indigenous. Mm-hmm. What would a successful collaboration look like?
Listen to us.
Say it loud for the people in the back.
Hire us as a consultant, and then we do all this work and then not even take anything in what we said or into account. I think, meaningful dialogue, critical dialogue is so important for sure. Like Dan said it, it's just, I don't know, I just listen and be willing to do the work too. I think, when we talk about racism and discrimination and stuff, those who are impacted by systemic racism are always the one that has to do the work, like, why is the emotional labor on us? It's like your system. Anyway, yeah.
No,
or else I get all fiery and stuff, but I'll just zip it right now.
Well, I'll pick it up. I'll take it. But that's super important that people who are in a collaborative space with Indigenous creatives to do that self-exploration and to do the sweeping out of some of any of those lingering beliefs, limiting beliefs. That's important. I think absolutely agency, what's the power dynamic in the relationship is important. I think the word collaborate is key. I've told several industry people, I'm like, yeah, consultant, it's like kind of a bad word in Indigenous community because we've been consulted and not listened to, and now we're just like, yeah, whatever, we know what you mean when you say consult. But collaborate has a different connotation, as long as it comes down to who has the agency in the room, who has the decision making. Not to say that I collaborate with non-Indigenous people in different capacities. In my creative process, I like being challenged. I like having people ask questions. I like the push of really having to do the work of think, well, what do I actually want to say here? What am I actually wanting? Having but it's always understood that it's my work, that no one's trying to make claims to that, etc. So I think it's respect is at its heart, and an awareness of all of that colonial baggage. And as Jules says, like, why are we carrying it all? Like, here, take some of this, you guys deal with it, because give us that space. And the people I collaborate with are really good at doing that. There's times where we're in especially in the doc space, where we're in situations sometimes where there's a challenge. And I have and continue to work with this non-Indigenous producer who's like, oh, this is my job. I'm going to go deal with this difficult situation. So you don't have to. I'm like, okay, that's great. Because I don't want to, because I want to focus on what's my next shot. And, what is the next piece here? And I'm not having to deal with all of the, that element of it. So, but yeah, I think, respect is at the heart of it.
And I think sort of as a producer who is, working in the development space, for me, my biggest question is, what do you need? If I'm going to say, yeah, this idea is great, let's make it. It's about asking the person who's making it, like, what do you need? What do you need from the crew and team that we put together? What are the important things that make it easier for you, as Tasha was just saying, to do your job? That, I think, is what a producer's sort of and development executive's job should be in a perfect world, is to say, I understand the story that's being told here, and if they're in a situation like mine where it's a story that's out of my, it's not my place to tell it, but there's something compelling here. It's about paving the path for the person who's telling it to tell it as singularly and as meaningfully and as sort of easily as possible. Easily is not the best word, but you know what I mean. It's just, I think that's the difference, is oftentimes people want something, but they want to plug it into something. They want to plug an idea into a world that doesn't necessarily incubate the idea. It doesn't make it easy to tell. And what you're left with is a creator in an environment that doesn't actually support or sustain the storytelling, having to just trudge through it, hoping for the best, when the experience itself could be so much easier if the team was something that was kind of built from the creator and came from the question of, what do you need?
There's not enough producers asking that of Indigenous filmmakers. And maybe that's what we need more of. Yes, Dan.
So we got to work with Dan. Got to work with you, Dan.
Let's do it. Happily.
Ask us what you need.
All right.
Ask you to ask us what we need.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll send you a list.
Yeah. I've already been making mine, so
Yeah.
I'm on it.
Uh-huh.
We have a final question from the audience, just being mindful of time. What projects are you looking forward to? What makes you hopeful and excited about current projects led by Indigenous creatives and queer creatives? This will be our final question before we end.
Well, lots of things make me excited about the future. I think, I think that I want to give a shout out to a Blackfoot filmmaker, Trevor Solway, who, really, I think created a model, of collective community filmmaking, in that, he makes his own work, but he created a collective in his community of Siksika First Nation called the Napi Collective, and, trained people, brings in people to present, so that, there's a capacity at the community level to tell stories. I think it's a really beautiful model. And, I think that notion of care, I get asked to talk a lot about care just because of the kind of work I do. And sometimes that means care for, the filmmaker, but also care for people in the film, care for crew. But I also think, we keep that ethic in, how we try to, support other people's careers, how we create space in our productions for learning and for and supportive learning. Something you said earlier, Dan, like, having space to make mistakes. And I think mistakes are part of the creative process. And I think sometimes there's a lot of pressure. to never make one. And then, and then what are the implications and the consequences when, you try something and it doesn't quite work. And it's like, oh, well, but I learned all this and this and this, and I'm going to bring it to my next project. And, I think that sometimes gets left out of the process.
Well, God forbid someone learn from a failure. I mean, you know what I mean? That's some of the greatest learning experiences you can have. But so few people get that in entertainment. So few people, I mean, generally speaking, but so few people get the luxury of failing. It's only like a very small, very specific demographic of people in entertainment that I think all of us could ask ourselves, how are they still getting money? The answer is quite easy and quite simple, but the ability to just have that freedom, I think, is so crucial. And, that's a big hope of mine.
Just from my time in academia, I've realized that, our research methodologies do intersect with, our film practice, especially when we're doing research or filming in our own communities. There is protocol, and there's different protocols across Turtle Island, depending on which community you're going into. So I'm really excited about, seeing, I taught for a very long time, and I taught at the Indigenous film program there at Capilano and have a lot of Indigenous students. And I just love seeing them at work. Like, I just feel like they are doing what they love. And I show up on set, and everything that I've taught, all the theory and stuff like that, like, they're putting into practice. And for me, that makes me feel great, because it's like, my teachings come from my people, from my grandparents, and, they're incorporating some of what I taught them into their work on set. So for me, that feels like that's what community is, and that's what listening is, and active listening, listening's a verb, you have to be present. So I just love seeing my students just succeed, and, they're getting money for their projects, and they have so many Indigenous people on their sets and stuff. I don't know. I just feel like it's like paying it forward in a way, you know what I mean? And I'm just really excited about the future and other stories that are going to be, surfacing. And I don't know. I'm excited. I love Trevor too. I mean, I love all my students and all the upcoming emerging filmmakers. I just going to Indigenous film festivals and seeing all the body of work, and so diverse, right? Like, it's like we've opened that door to that diversity that exists, that beautiful difference. And I think that's so important. And for me, as a filmmaker, it just makes me feel full.
Oh, Jules, that's a beautiful note. That's it. I think one of the questions that came through, talked about, and I think there was necessarily, we're telling stories that tell our history, and some of that history, of course, has been traumatic and hard, and also balancing that with joy and beauty and love, and having, beautiful Indigenous love stories and comedies, and, just that we have a full spectrum, right, of work that's being done. And I think that's the place we're moving into. And I'm also, really inspired by that. So I've been asked to wrap up. I think we could keep talking for much longer, but yes. So thank you both. I just want to make a note that, putting on my academic hat, that, we do have our new micro-credential series on countering stereotypes of Indigenous peoples. That's continuing education. And so this is a self-directed online series, and it's basically created for lifelong learners or professionals or anyone who wants to, expand their knowledge on, on the stereotypes and how they can be counteracted. We do have a foundations and a systems, but the work that I spoke from was on the representations. And so you take the foundations first, and then you can take either representations or systems. And our new foundation online course starts January 5th, and registration is open.
I just had one question. Is it worth putting the website for ISO in the chat just so people can have
Yeah.
that resource?
Yes, I think you
Is
know
it
what,
there?
we're sending out info after. I think we'll add it to that.
Okay, great. Because that's a really valuable resource.
Yeah.
All good suggestions for sure. I'm excited for everybody and the work that you guys are all doing and all the new things to come, you know. And speaking on that, this Friday in Edmonton, Jules' latest TELUS original film entitled Chubby Cree Win the Journey is showing this Friday at 7 p.m. at the Metro Cinema in the Garden. Q&A with the film team, as well as a special performance by Chubby Cree. If you haven't heard Chubby Cree sing yet, it's a powerful, powerful way of expression and strength. So I really encourage everyone, check it out on Friday in person. If you're in Edmonton, if you're not, keep a lookout for Pimasioin. Even I'm still working on my Cree being Cree, always learning.
I don't even know how to say it in Swampy Cree, but you're doing a great job.
So thank you for joining us today. The recorded session will be streamed on TELUS Originals online viewing platforms, as well as the Faculty of Native Studies YouTube channel. Thank you so much, Jules, Tasha, and Dan. It was an absolute joy just to listen and learn. You know, there were so many questions that came from the audience. I wish we could have gotten to more, but it just shows that this discussion should go beyond here in this space and place. And I encourage everyone, check out Indigenous films, check out Indigenous filmmakers, check out queer films, check out all of it, support it, get in those seats, as Tasha mentions. And thank you. We'll be sending out a post survey link and information about TELUS Originals and the Faculty of Native Studies, as well as the ISO office.
Okay.
So please, the Faculty of Native Studies and our ASL interpreters. And congratulations to our filmmakers. Don't forget to keep up with TELUS Originals on TELUS Optic TV Channel 8 or watch telusoriginals.com on Instagram. Have a great rest of your day. Kanaskamutin. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.